A very good evening to you all and welcome to this rescheduled London lecture. As many of you will know, we had originally planned to present this lecture in London's Regent Street Cinema back in March, but we took the difficult decision to postpone, which we can now be certain was the right thing to do given the circumstances. This is our second fully online London lecture. The first was given by Professor Paul Bernal from the School of Law last month. You can watch it on our YouTube channel if you missed it live. I'm pleased to see that so many of you from London and beyond have chosen to join us in this virtual space this evening. As Rachel said, my name is Barrow. I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor for the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at the University of East Anglia. I'm here to introduce our speaker for tonight, Eylem Atakav, Professor of Film, Gender and Public Engagement from UEA's School of Art, Media and American Studies. First, though, I hope you'll all have been able to watch Professor Atakav's amazing documentary film, Growing Up Married. It's important, relevant, more relevant than ever, and really thought-provoking. I'd really look forward to hearing your comments, your questions, and doing the Q&A with you and Professor Atakav at the end of her talk. Before Eylem gives her talk on her research and her experiences making Growing Up Married, I wanted to give you an update on some of the most recent developments in the arts and humanities at UEA. Some of you may be familiar with our award-winning Thinking Without Borders campaign, launched in 2018 as a way to share our research with you. Our latest Thinking Without Borders film powerfully documents UEA's response to COVID-19 in context with efforts from the global community, from creating PPE to housing doctors and nurses on campus, to studying the COVID-19 genome. We're proud of the part we continue to play in fighting the pandemic. I encourage you all to visit our YouTube channel to watch the video if you haven't already. Just search YouTube for UEA. We'll also put the link in the chat after the Q&A. In related news, school closures have prompted us to bring forward our Festival of Literature for Young People, which was meant to be held in June, and hold a reimagined digitalised version right now. We're currently in week 5 of Fly, the lockdown diaries as they've been renamed, and are delighted to see so many budding young creatives responding to our challenges set by well-known authors, many of whom are our graduates. What seems like a lifetime was actually just a few months ago. We welcomed the comedy duo Paul Whitehouse and Charlie Higson back to campus, where they first met as students in the 1970s, to mark the 25th anniversary of the Fast Show. The pair were interviewed by Professor Brett Mills in front of a sold-out crowd, swapping stories about their days at UEA, including tales of their punk band, the Right Hand Lovers, which according to Whitehouse was the most hated of all concepts. As the evening drew to a close, we presented Paul Whitehouse with a letter from the Vice-Chancellor, offering him an honorary doctorate. Some of you may recall that Charlie Higson received one of his own back in 2014. Out in the foyer after the event, the audience mingled, surrounded by excerpts from Higson's archive material, which he donated to the UEA-housed British Archive for Contemporary Writing in 2016. From this September, we'll be celebrating 50 years of creative writing at UEA. As many of you will know, creative writing began at UEA in 1970 and was the first such course in the UK, introduced by Sir Malcolm Bradbury and Sir Angus Wilson. The first and only student in 1970 was Sir Ian McEwan, and a decade later the equally famous Nobel laureate Sir Kazuo Ishiguro studied with us. We've taught more published and prize-winning authors than any other UK programme, including Anne Enright, Tracy Chevalier, Obami Adebayo, Emma Healy, Naomi Alderman, John Boyne, Louise Doughty, Charlene Teo, and many, many more. It really is a long and illustrious list. To celebrate those 50 years, we intend to look forward, and we want to empower many more international and diverse voices, especially at this time when boundaries and borders are suddenly looking a little more rigid and perhaps a little less accessible. With the help of our supporters, we hope to find and raise the next global generation of writers by creating the Global Voices Scholarship Programme and International Chairs of Creative Writing. This new programme will see 5 chairs each take on the role for 1 year, during which time they will lead the way for emerging writers and highlight unheard voices and stories from Asia, the Americas, Africa Australia and the Middle East. Alongside this, the Global Voices programme will see the creation of 50 international creative writing MA scholarships that give the world's most promising new voices a life-changing opportunity to study at UEA. Throughout these celebrations, of course, we'll continue to support research with the potential for real impact, like that of Professor Atakav and her colleagues and students, which I'm very much looking forward to hearing about. So on to Eylem. Professor Eylem Atakav came to the UK from Turkey in 2003. She earned her MA and PhD in Southampton and then secured a teaching post at the University of Winchester. Before long, however, a post came up at UEA. Eylem recalls how when she came for interview, the panel was full of people whose work she's been citing for years. It must have been an encouraging experience because she joined the staff in 2009 and has recently celebrated a decade as part of the UEA family. Her contribution to innovative teaching during this time has been repeatedly recognised nationally and internationally with a significant number of highly prestigious awards, nominations and successful funding bids for teaching fellowships. In March 2016, Professor Atakav became the first non-US academic to receive the prestigious Pedagogy Award from the Society for Cinema and Media Studies. She's also been selected as a National Teaching Fellow of the Higher Education Academy, and she's currently the chair of the Teaching, Learning and Scholarship Knowledge Community of NAFSA, the Association of International Educators, a really prestigious achievement. So please join me now in welcoming Professor Eylem Atakav to give her talk on visibility, voice and the power of film, after which there'll be time for a Q&A session using the chat function. Over to you, Eylem.
Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me and see me okay. Thank you very much, Professor Sarah Barrow, for the introduction, and thank you very much, Rachel Watkins and the events team, the award-winning events team at UEA. They've been absolutely amazing in putting all this together, given the circumstances. Welcome all. Welcome to UEA alumni as well. And in the original piece I had written for this lecture, I put something like, no better place than a cinema to talk about the power of film. But now, given the circumstances, I would like to say no better place than an online platform. So welcome to those joining us from around the world as well. So what I would like to do to keep to the time, I quite like looking at people's eyes when I do my lectures, and I don't like sticking with text as such. But given the circumstances, and given that I can't see your faces and reactions to what I'm going to say, I would like to stick with the text to keep us to the time, but hopefully we'll look forward to your questions at the end as well. So in Turkey, people's names and surnames still have a sharp and immediate political resonance. This historically stems from a desire to reflect changing realities, usually during turbulent times, and it demonstrates how the personal encapsulates the political. My name, Atıl Eylem, is an extremely politically resonant name, which literally means go for action. It has an overt link with the leftist political activism that both my parents were involved in the 70s. And this kind of extraordinary responsibility attached to my identity is quite pivotal in the research that I do as an academic. It assigns me the role and the pride of carrying the name of the in my name, the keywords of the left-wing activists who fought and at times were either killed or seriously tortured physically or mentally for their ideas. In this lecture, I'd like to share my own and my students' teaching and research journeys in crossing borders between one nation to another, between academia and activism, and between film theory and filmmaking practice, while highlighting the value of public engagement within the discipline of humanities. I would like to revisit discussions around the impact of feminist research in the context of creative practice, and to demonstrate how and why public engagement is a useful strategy as a means for achieving and pushing for social change, with the potential to turn feminist theoretical academic research into activism. I'll divide my talk into 3 sections, as you have seen in the title: Lights, Camera and Action. But before that, to provide a bit of context, I'd like to take you back to 2011, when I came up with the first of its kind module, Women, Islam and Media. And at UEA, there wasn't any module as such in the UK. There were modules around women and Islam and women and media, but nothing that brought all 3 together. So we decided to do a press release from the UEA. And boy, did we receive attention from international media. The news went from the Huffington Post to the Guardian, and even for some reason that I will never understand, to Marie Claire. And the public's responses were rather thought-provoking. And in the process, I've learned one thing: never, ever read the comments by the public on an article that is written about you or your module. Actually, do read them, copy and paste them, and bring them to class to explain the value of why we have been, or we would be studying this topic. This is because I was referred to, and I'm kind of proud of this, as an alien terrorist who came to this country to promote Islamist ideology to our kids. And then somebody wrote, this is my favorite: "You're invading our universities by teaching fantasy." And I copied and pasted them, brought them back to class so the students could see why we were studying this, particularly when I wasn't even religious. So this whole thing, the module, kind of received the international attention and brought the media back into the classroom. So BBC Asian Network, for example, did a radio program with the students. And seeing that engagement with the media, students decided to make their own documentary, and decided to move from just critiquing media to actually making their own media about their experiences. And Norfolk and Suffolk constabularies visited the classroom. And for years it went on, that connection. And it's become such a useful and fruitful connection in the project for Growing Up Married as well. And students at the end of the whole program ended up influencing national policy, because at the time I was invited, given the media attention, by the House of Lords to write for the Commission on Religion and Belief in British Public Life. That was back in 2015. And I changed the assessment for the module so that students could respond to that, not just me as the expert to give evidence to this commission. And the students were cited in it at the end, which also then led to a collaborative project that we had received funding for on British Muslim values that I conducted with 2 amazing professors from UEA, Professor Lee Jarvis and Professor Lee Marsden. And this whole experience of teaching women, Islam and media, and engaging with the public, engaging with the media, engaging with policymakers, taught me something really important. The kind of teaching outside the classroom to non-academic audiences, to engage with them, was really valuable. So it was all about taking teaching outside the classroom, and not just to the campus, but outside the campus at national and even international levels. So I want to kind of leave that there, because all those connections that we have built up during the teaching of women, Islam and media has led to different connections of the networks that were needed for Growing Up Married. So then we can move on to lights. So how did it all start? When did the light bulb moment happen? So I want to kind of call this from feminist film theory to feminist film practice. Thinking about feminist activism through making media, in addition to examining media from a theoretical position, is of course not new. Feminist media theorists have engaged in cultural production since the 70s. As highlighted in Karen Boyle's observation, for example, feminists throughout the world have made significant progress in putting questions of violence against women onto political and legislative agendas, as well as in providing services for women, victims and survivors, while feminist cultural critics have examined the media's role in the circulation of gendered discourses about violence. As Liz Kelly et al. Argue, within an academic context in which feminism is understood both as theory and practice, feminist researchers' position is one in which they are part of the process of the discovery and understanding at the same time as being responsible for attempting to create change. This idea is also echoed in other works like Liz Stanley and Sue Wise, in which they saw no demarcation between doing feminism and doing feminist research. So in 2015, this is where I started, as I was writing up an article theorizing feminism and theorizing feminism in and the representations of honor killings in films from Turkey, I came to realize that what was missing in my work were the voices of women. I was at risk of making generalized assumptions around what womanhood entails within the context of Turkish society. There wasn't just one story, there were multiple stories of experience. It was at that point that I decided to take on the new challenge of making a film, rather than just critiquing films at a theoretical level. With zero budget, but a return ticket to Izmir, or hometown, I borrowed a camera from the university's television studio and traveled to Turkey for just 1 week. And this move, literally, physically, but also from theory to practice, originated with a previous conversation I had had with Avniye, the fourth woman you will have seen in the film, one of the interviewees, who's also a neighbor of my parents. In a previous visit to Izmir, the third biggest city, known for being the most westernized, secular and modern in Turkey, Avniye had asked me if I could have a chat with her 16-year-old daughter, who was eager to drop school and get married to the man she was in love with, who was 10 years her senior. It was at that point that she started telling me about her own story and her own forced marriage as a child, and her virginity tests and domestic sexual violence she endured, and the whole abuse from the family that she was involved in. In fact, according to the UNICEF report, Ending Child Marriage, Progress and Prospects, there were in 2013, there were 700 million women who were married as children, and 280 million girls were at risk of becoming child brides. According to CARE, as you will have seen on the PowerPoint slide, almost 39,000 girls become child brides every single day, often married to much older men. In Turkey, the reports written by the Turkish Population Research in 2015, they revealed that 1 in 3 marriages involves a girl under the age of 18. The figures here are alarming and signal the need for further and urgent research in the field. And I wanted to explore the effects of child and forced marriage while making women's experiences not only audible, but also visible, in an attempt to contribute to and advance debates around a significant, complex and emotionally charged human rights issue, which has often been silenced. So with all that in mind, and the desire of letting marginalized voices come through, be heard and be seen, I made my first ever documentary in 2016, Growing Up Married, as a person who failed her cinematography class back in undergrad, but we're not going to talk about that. I started with capturing women women's voices and subsequently developed, after making the film, the public engagement strategy around dissemination and distribution of these stories so that they were heard and seen, so that they could affect change through that process. My aim had become to consolidate feminist research and feminist practice. My position as a scholar and filmmaker is important here. I'm a UK-based and UK-trained feminist media scholar. I'm originally from Turkey, engaging for the first time in media production. This positionality is significant because I'm not only a woman making media, but an academic woman making media as a method to engage in research questions around violence against women in general and forced marriage and child brides in particular. The impetus to produce the film came from my academic projects over a number of years, exploring gender politics in the Middle East, representations of religion, violence against women in the form of honor crimes, virginity tests, forced marriage, domestic sexual violence, in the media in general and in films in particular. Yet switching from theory to practice presents its own challenges as one moves from critiquing media to making media. So then, it brings us to the camera bit, the process of making the film. But before I go into that, I would also like to signal the importance of partnering with students in this whole process. And as you will see on the PowerPoint slides, I think Lucy Rivers, who edited the film at the time, was my MA student, who's now currently doing her PhD, and Dr. Yukaric and Dr. Dabak over there as well, who were assistant director and assistant producer for the film, were all my students. And working with them has been absolutely amazing as we learned from each other as well. So I want to acknowledge their work, and most of the time when I do Q&As, if available, Lucy very kindly joins me as well. So I started working on Growing Up Married together with my students with a desire to give voice to women's stories that were discursively silenced, and with the aim of drawing attention to the significance of activism in feminist media research. While exploring ways in which women articulate their experiences of being child brides and being forced into marriage, I argue that women speaking out about these experiences not only reveal issues around forced marriage, but also, and most significantly, shed light on stories of domestic violence, sexual abuse, as well as child abuse. They also highlight the ways in which the concept of honor is perceived within the social and cultural contexts of Turkey. Indeed, they reveal clearly the ways in which a cultural obsession with family honor and women's chastity are produced and reinforced. So in this section, I'd like to spend a little bit of time in reflecting on the filmmaking process, as this offers an exploration of the intractable nature of the topic while revealing the complexities around making feminist media. Personal connections and friendships my mother had led to having access to Leyla and Avniye. Leyla, just like 3 other women from the neighborhood, heard that I was making a film about child brides and knocked at my parents' door at 10:30 at night to ask if she could talk too. This was a pivotal moment for me to realize what an ordinary and yet invisible experience forced marriage was, and child brides were. Women were prepared to speak out, and they were clearly looking for ways in which they could act on this particular desire. The relationship that I had formed previously with these women highlighted the extent to which they positioned me as an insider. And I always think, if a journalist from the UK decided to make a film and somehow had access to these interviewees, would he or she be able to be welcome to listen to these stories in the same way that I was? Possibly not. Being a woman younger than the interviewees, and being a native, and having my mother in the room, who were her friends, who's friends to them in the room during the interviews, were absolutely helpful. And in fact, our year's interview was the first one, the one that you watched, fourth interview rather, was the first one I filmed. And I asked her to talk to my mother instead of looking at me as I stood behind the camera. And this created a space in which she felt comfortable, or at least more comfortable. The experience of filming made me realize how women speaking out about their personal experiences of marriage was a feminist act itself. They spoke because they wanted to, and in doing so, they have given access to their stories through the film while encouraging other women who would watch the film to disclose their stories. And this is evident, and this is a crucial point, I think, that disclosures I receive from people who watch the film after almost every screening. Half of the film took place at the Women's Support Centre in Tire in Izmir, and getting access to the centre wouldn't have been as straightforward had my cousin not been in charge of running the centre, so that was quite lucky. She introduced me to the two women who happened to be visiting the centre on the day of the filming, and they agreed there and then to tell stories as long as their faces weren't fully shown in the film. And these interviews were not arranged for a particular time or date, and I told them that my plan is to make a film about child brides, and they just agreed that for their experiences to be recorded on camera as long as my cousin, who knew both of them, were in the room with them. The filming at the centre, because the interviews were ad hoc in nature, was a challenge for someone like me, who was new, who wasn't used to the practice of filmmaking. It is in many ways a different act to sit and watch films and critique them from a theoretical point of view rather than making them. The challenge was even more complicated. The two women interviewed at the centre, Women's Support Centre, had not informed me about what they were going to tell me about their lives. I didn't realise the extent of the violence, particularly in one case which involved two experiences of rape. I didn't realise the extent of the violence they were going to share with me. And adding to this was the unstructured nature of the interviews. I didn't ask pre-formed questions. Instead, I asked them to speak out about their lives for a documentary. One of the challenges during the filmmaking process was that there was not opportunity for a second take. And in fact, a case in point here is the interview I did with one of the women who was telling me about her experience of rape, and it was difficult for her to articulate this anyhow. And despite the unwanted background, which you will have heard in the film, background noise during the interview, I wasn't in a position to ask for a second date. You can't stop somebody to say, oh, can we just have a second take on that rape story? You can't. You really need to be there at that very moment. So then the aesthetics, the visual style of the film is very much informed by the content. And this taught me that filming the experience of violence in perfect conditions is or would never be possible. The questions posed shift their focus from how are women represented in this film to how do I represent in my film at times unrepresentable violence, physical, emotional, verbal, while avoiding re-victimizing the interviewees. Rather than presenting women's stories as stories of victims, we edited the documentary in ways that would allow the audience to see how strong and powerful these women are, for they resisted and fought for their rights. In the editing room, from hours of footage, one has to construct a story. There were times when we thought it would have been more ethical to have the women interviewed for the film in the editing room editing their own stories. In fact, I've called and consulted Leila and Avnir, who I had access to, and their opinions on the stories we were constructing from their original stories. I also shared some of the footage with them when and where possible. And I remember Avnir asking if I could extend her story and tell the audience about how much she loves her new husband. I remember explaining to her that the film's aim was to privilege her own voice and was not to show her life as dependent on yet another man. Leila is the one who determined, for example, the ending of the film by sending a photo of herself a year after the filming took place. Just the last day of the editing, she sent a WhatsApp message, which is still on my phone. And one cannot escape power dynamics, but reflexivity can be seen as embedded in the moment while filming, as well as after that moment has passed in the editing room. The existing literature on feminist research is mainly focused on the potential disempowerment of the researched and the inequalities between the researcher and the researched. During the interviews, I was incredibly overwhelmed by the power of experiences of women. I felt powerless, that this notion of the subjects of research having less power was completely destroyed. And in fact, in one night after filming about 10 hours, I had a nervous breakdown at the dinner table, soaking in like a sponge all those experiences. And I was just listening into them, and they were experiencing those in real life. So I'm aware that the 4 women in the film are distinct from me, that I am also aware that I hold the power of filming and editing their stories, and that there is nothing that can undo this inequality. But my work arises from informed knowledge of that relationship. Also, I see it as my responsibility as a researcher and filmmaker to provide the participants with feedback from different screenings that have been taking place around the world. This signals my commitment to allowing them to see how they become agents of change for others. In other words, while awareness of hierarchies necessarily underpins feminist practice, our work as feminist scholars and filmmakers has the power of making a difference by positively impacting policy and society. For this reason, I argue that the dissemination of feminist research as a method on its own has the potential to become a form of activism, which would then allow academic research to travel outside academia. And this brings me to the final section of my talk, in which I would like to reflect on the impact of this project. So, action. I'd like to demonstrate how the dissemination of the documentary has allowed this feminist project to find a way into policy frameworks, raising important questions of women's experience. Indeed, Growing Up Married has responded to the needs of policies around forced marriage and child marriage and violence against women, and demonstrates how significant it is to build bridges between cultures and countries on significant human rights issues. It is important to acknowledge that our film and my research came out of a very particular context, the legacy of forced marriage and child brides in Turkey. Yet this is a much, much wider issue that goes beyond the borders of Turkey. Forced marriage happens in the UK and it happens globally. In this regard, the project also signals how feminist film research can be at the forefront of questioning and analysing differences across all borders. Moreover, the documentary's journey to date shows how stories of women in Turkey can be useful and impactful in informing policy in the UK around forced and child marriage. It's thought-provoking to see, though without suggesting that women's experiences can be universalized, that's definitely not what I'm suggesting, how experiences of women in Turkey can travel through film to the UK and have an impact on policy and society. Through significant and international levels of media engagement, as well as a series of public engagement activities, the project has been influential in building bridges between cultures and countries. To make academic research accessible outside academia means, as Corinne Glesner puts it, to create research in forms that others will want to read, watch, or listen to, and feel and learn from the representations. And I would like to think that as a team, me and my students decided and did precisely that. The film has played a significant role in changing the lives of individual subjects of the film. It has increased the confidence and willingness of victims and survivors and affected communities to come forward. Avniye, one of the interviewees in the film, describes how taking part in the documentary has given her a unique opportunity to integrate her experiences of forced marriage into her life narrative. She said, "After talking to you, I felt like my confidence was restored, and I felt so happy to have shared my story. It's comforting to speak out. Those were things that I haven't spoken about before, ever, and I managed to reflect on my life while talking to you. It helped me come to terms with what happened. It made me realize how grateful I am of my life now." For Leyla, the other interviewee, talking for the film acted as a form of reconciliation with the past. Making the film was the first opportunity for Leyla to narrate her trauma, and it gave her the consolation that voicing her experience through documentary has the potential to affect wider change. She said, "Sharing my story with you was totally comforting." Interesting how they're using similar words when I asked them the same question. "Such a huge relaxation, years worth of secrets. It filled me with confidence, and I'm glad lots of people will watch the film and hear about my experience. It doesn't matter who I am. If my story can change one person's idea about forced marriage, then I will be even happier." And I'm gonna kind of leave you at that and move on from the impact on individuals. And there are many other individuals who've written to me emails, messages, letters, and got in touch after watching the film to tell me about how they were affected by the film and how they wanted to act on it. Lots of students are trying to, they emailed me to say that they're going to be working on their dissertation projects or other essays and so on around similar topics after seeing the film, which is of course great. The film also had a bit of local impact, particularly working with those connections that we built up in the Women, Islam and Media course that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. It was about training for awareness and prevention and safeguarding. Those were kind of the themes of the impact narrative that we followed for the regional impact, the local impact for the project. In addition to the public screenings, Growing Up Married has proved a valuable resource to inform and train both UK public services and charities, including Norfolk Constabulary, the Norfolk Safeguarding Children Board, Norfolk County Council Domestic Abuse Champions Programme, NHS professionals and Leeway Domestic Violence and Abuse Services, and so on, and several more. The film has changed the content of the training provided by the police force. And I delivered domestic abuse champions training for Norfolk County Council, and the event was attended, interestingly, by a diverse range of professionals, including health governance and medical professionals as well. Lots of interest from sexual health clinics as well. And one attendee who from that workshop wrote in their feedback, "This session gave people an opportunity to voice any concerns they had in practice. I feel this is an experience that everyone should be given, as it gives people the understanding of how to approach the situation and what to look out for when dealing with potential domestic abuse cases." It's really interesting how those stories of ordinary women, 4 of them from Turkey, come to have an impact on the ways in which people's practice are structured through these training programs and workshops. I delivered a talk, a keynote address back in October 2019 to Leeway Domestic Violence and Abuse Services for their annual conference. I've spoken at screenings at the Pandora Project, which I would encourage you all to go and check, supporting women and children affected by domestic abuse charity in Kings Lynn and West Norfolk, St Giles Trust, and at a meeting chaired by the Police Constable Commissioner for Norfolk Youth Commission. I ran training for the honour-based abuse, female genital mutilation and forced marriage multi-agency strategy group of the Norfolk Constabulary, for the NHS Norwich Community Conversation Group in Norfolk Constabulary again, and the designated Safeguarding Children team for Norfolk. NHS doctors, number of nurses, and looked after children named professionals unit. This demonstrates the extent of the engagement the film had at local and regional levels. And what has become incredibly clear out of this training for me is people in these services need voices, need people's stories and experiences to be able to provide effective service. And that's more than important for them to have experiences. They were incredibly in need of that so that they could deliver better service around domestic violence in general. The film also had an impact on national policy making, and as a result of the project, Turkish women's stories have influenced the way in which policies around child marriage in the UK are debated. I've been working very closely with the all-party parliamentary group on population development and reproductive health, as well as different NGOs and charities, including the Iranian and Kurdish women's rights organization, Karma Nirvana, and many others, to change the new domestic abuse bill so that it criminalizes child marriage in the UK, no longer allowing marriage between 16 and 18 with parental consent. And for that, I encourage you all to check out hashtag Safeguard Futures Ban Child Marriage campaign that they've been leading. The documentary was screened at the House of Lords. The teaser was screened at the House of Commons back in September 2019, where it's been used as evidence in the discussion of the proposed policy changes because it presents, again, the voices and experiences of child brides. Since its nationwide premiere in the UK at London's oldest cinema, at Phoenix Cinema, back in 2016, Growing Up Married has achieved international reach, including screenings in Turkey, Cyprus, Bangladesh, the US, and Japan, to a cumulative audience of approximately 5,000 people. It was featured in the 15th Dhaka International Film Festival's official selection in 2017, Charlotte International Film Festival in the US, and it's received national and international press attention. Zoe Tabari's 2016 article was published in multiple news outlets, including the New York Times and for some reason the Daily Mail, where it said Turkish child marriage film shines light on hidden abuses, details the reality of forced and child marriages by referring to the film. And it says child brides in Turkey, as you'll see on the slide, are often raped, beaten and forced to undergo virginity tests, according to the director of a new documentary which aims to break the silence on the taboo issue. It's all about voice and breaking that silence indeed, and that's what I would like to focus on in that news report. The film has had an impact on students both at UEA and at other higher education institutions. And one scholar in America who I met through NAFSA, the Association of International Educators, Charlene Ingwersen from Drury University, describes the film and its impact on her students of literature, which I didn't think would make that connection. But she wrote, the film helped my literature students move beyond what they can imagine on several levels, to consider their roles in larger realities of the struggle for human rights, as well as a deeper appreciation of human courage and the power of personal narrative. The film, I was lucky enough, was screened in Los Angeles at the NAFSA annual conference to over 15,000 people. And we also did a digital storytelling contest at Walsh University in Akron in Ohio, in the States, with lots of students getting cameras and talking and making films and talking or learning to talk about their experiences through visual language as well, where I also screen the film and talk to them about the way in which they can approach filmmaking, but also the impact they can create if they focus on social topics as such. So that brings me to kind of my conclusion section. So in responding to one of feminism's central claims that women's perspectives have often been silenced or ignored, my research is interested in listening to women's experiences and making them not only audible, but also visible in the form of film. This, of course, brings up certain questions. What does a film allow that, for example, an academic journal article does not? A research film not only allows us to hear the voices of women, but also enables us to directly capture the nuances of gesture, facial expression, and vocal intonation and emphasis. This is particularly powerful in the context of sharing the experiences of women and letting the film travel. With this film, we wanted, together with my students, to give voice to women's stories that they were otherwise not able to tell in this way. This required a critical reflection on the question of what is the best medium to give that voice. Had I chosen to record women's voices and use them to quote them in an academic article, although there is a lot of value in academic theoretical work, would it have the same reach film already had? In this regard, I'm mainly interested in discussing ways in which we can consolidate feminist research and practice as a method of activism. As Harriet Jacobs aptly puts it, lived experiences of women is a key place from which to build knowledge and generate social change. And only by experience can anyone realize how deep and dark is that pit of abominations. Growing up married is evidence for the idea that the voices of women and those oppressed need to be heard. The voice of one former bride plays a particularly important role in the film, as you will have seen. Layla is heard singing, something she hasn't done since she was 14, since she was forced to marry her ex-husband. This highlights the restrictions that women have been forced to be child brides have to face every day, and the impact that marriage has on their sense of self, sense of identity. Layla carries out a self-imposed singing ban to separate the horrors of her married life from better times in her childhood when she sang to express herself. This is why I chose to start and end the film with her singing voice. It's crucial in this context to understand that women whose experiences are silenced, whose stories are marginalized, when they speak, they become agents of change, directly for their own lives and indirectly for others beyond the cultures they come from. Silence and invisibility, or voice and visibility, are key here. Forced marriage and child marriage are alarming human rights issues. I chose to put a rolling number on the corner of the screen, as you will have seen as the film runs. Every 27 minutes, the screening time of the film, 710 more girls become child brides somewhere in the world. And that's old records, several years old. And these are recorded figures. There are so many unrecorded ones. At times, particularly in Turkey, there is no paperwork involved. The marriages are often illegally conducted at local mosques by local religious authorities, and girls are not always given birth certificates so that their families can sell them into marriage as soon as they reach puberty by faking their age. These crimes are unseen and their perpetrators go unpunished. Stories similar to the ones depicted in the film are everywhere in Turkey and beyond, not just Turkey. Films in particular, and cultural products in general, represent aspects of reality. If we want to see a change in reality, we need a change in the films and media that seek to represent that reality. This is why making films helps with making the issue visible and audible while allowing these stories to travel around the world. As humanities academics, we are agents of positive change, taking part in collaborative work that binds people, states, and nations closer together is crucial. All those in academia, from faculty to administrators, from staff, students, are rapidly becoming aware of how their innovative engagements with shared social and global responsibilities can facilitate change. And there is incredible value in taking action for that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Eylem. Apologies, my link was a little delayed there, coming back up again. That was really fantastic. I can see we've got some really lovely responses, plenty of claps coming through in the chat, which is really great there. It's such a strange experience, but it's nice to be able to share this Q&A with you. Thank you to everybody who has been putting messages and really supportive and lovely comments in the chat. I think it's fair to say that your lecture has been inspiring, thought-provoking, has hopefully kind of provoked some action as well as some thoughts, which is really good, and some new connections. So thank you for that. Without further ado, I'm just going to kind of give a couple of comments and then we'll come to the Q&A, because it would be great to engage with our audience here before we close. So before we move on to the Q&A, I'd just like to make a small request of everybody out there. We're going to send you all an email to everybody who's registered for tonight's event. It would include a link to a short evaluation survey. We'd be really grateful if you could take a few minutes to complete this survey. It'll help us to plan for future events online and in person when we can all finally meet up again in London, we hope. So we've now got an opportunity for you to ask Eylem any questions you may have about the topic, of course. To ask a question, please just click on the purple tab in the bottom right. I can see many people are already doing that. Type your question into the chat. We'll get to as many questions as we can, and we'll finish in good time for the clap for carers that takes place shortly. But shall we just have a little scroll through the questions, and I'll go back to ones I saw further on. So you talked, Eylem, about sort of failing your film technique class, and there's but clearly you can make films. You're a great filmmaker, a very powerful and connected filmmaker. So how did you learn? We've got a question here from Taryn. How did you learn the techniques for making this film? Had you had any previous practical experience? What actually was your learning process there?
I think, thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for the great comments coming up. I can't read all of them at the moment, but and some questions. And Sarah, thank you for running the Q&A. I know it's a hugely busy time for you with COVID and everything and the university structure, so I really appreciate you taking the time to do this Q&A. How did I learn about filmmaking? Well, failing cinematography class at undergraduate degree is a good starting point. It gives you the sufficient amount of will to do better. And I have been watching a lot of the work that Biban Kidron, the filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, has done. Also, Abir Haddad, a Palestinian filmmaker, did the first ever documentary about the domestic sexual violence in the Arab world, and their kind of ways of filming people who don't want to be filmed gave me quite a lot of ideas around how I could film. Lots of people ask me about whether I took a film crew with me to do the filming in Turkey. I absolutely haven't. It was just me and the camera, as zero budget as that. And I want to also say I've learned a lot from my students. Burcu Dabak, for example, and Lucy, they taught me how to edit films. They taught me how to subtitle films, and I've learned a lot together with them. There is a lot of value in doing collaborative work.
Great. We've got a couple of comments here from Thomas Chakrabarti. Thank you for your comments and questions. That's great. He asked, so to follow up from what you've just said, whether you worried at all that as a first-time filmmaker, you wouldn't be able to do justice to the issue and the women's accounts. Were you at all sort of nervous about the technological issue and handling that material in this way?
That's a very good question. I reflected on it in the editing room quite a lot. I think teaching film editing from a theoretical point of view, as someone who hasn't sat in the editing room and did that, is completely different to actually editing a film yourself. And then you get to realize how powerful you are as a filmmaker and how you have the power of changing stories that people have originally told you about. So I was really aware of the fact that I may not have made justice to the stories, and there was 14 hours of footage or something, and we had to bring it down to 27 minutes, and that's an ethical decision in itself. And I kept that awareness and responsibility all the time, and that's also one of the reasons why the film is not necessarily publicly available online, to protect the women in the film, because sometimes consent forms and ethical clearance forms and so on do not necessarily protect the people. So I've learned a lot throughout that process, and I'm always reflective, always.
Great. Thank you. And in that note, I have a feeling I know how you might respond to the next one, but I think it's a really important question around sort of ethics and connection to the people that you filmed. So we've got a question from Anne-Sophie, who says, do you feel like you've a duty to follow up with the women who you filmed, in terms of any sort of emotional, psychological support? Not that it's your role, Anne-Sophie's saying, but as a filmmaker, you've clearly stirred up lots of memories. She goes on to say, do you feel like you have a duty? Oh, no, that's the same question. It's just down twice. Sorry.
Okay. I absolutely, thank you for that question. I absolutely feel that, and huge responsibility. Every single time we screen the film, and I mean this, I contact at least Layla to say, to share with her some of the comments and so on. And when I share things with Avnia, she says, oh, why didn't you put more screen time off me? Yeah, let's do another one, and then I'll tell you even more stories and so on. I feel that responsibility. And the two other women were at the Women's Support Centre. They were getting great support from psychologists and so on, counselling and so on. But Leila and Avnia, who are neighbours, well, you might have seen at the end of the film with Layla growing her hair. I keep in touch with her on WhatsApp, and the other day she sent me a message to say, well, my hair is really long, look at this, you know, can I have it cut now? And I said, I'm not the dresser, of course you can have it cut. You know, that's no problem. So it's an interesting discussion. I keep that discussion alive, and that's the best I can do for now. And sharing their stories, as well as I feel like I'm a person who uses this film as a tool to do work for them, and that's what keeps me going.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Anna Pearson says thank you for a really thought-provoking lecture on an important human rights issue, and she says, have you ever used your research to try and influence policy in Turkey?
I haven't. It's when I start talking about Turkish politics, I start getting twin nervous tics, and I start getting angry, and I kind of want to move away from that. A couple of things I've done was to try work with UNICEF to screen the film, UNICEF Turkey. That we couldn't follow that up, to be very bold. The other thing was me connecting with the Rotary Club to screen the film at coffee houses in Turkey, which are it's not even gender segregated, it's exclusive to men. They sit there and play card games all day long. I thought it would be good for them to keep in the background, seeing these women talking about what's happened to them, and so that they could think carefully about what their decisions would be within the larger family when they're making decisions about their girls and sometimes boys for that matter. I haven't been thinking thoroughly about influencing policy in Turkey. I do, however, really want to one day make a documentary interviewing the imam, religious authorities at mosques who do the deed. That would be interesting, but I could probably risk my life on that one. So not sure how I feel about that, but why not?
Yeah, exactly. Something for later on.
Mm.
In that mode, given that it is such a personal topic and a very kind of harrowing one in many ways, given that it's you know it's your culture and so on, how do you separate yourself from such harrowing stories, or how did you when you were making the film? How do you to kind of separate yourself from them? I guess to a certain extent, you don't want to separate yourself. You know, you want to be attached, but in order to kind of maintain your sanity, what process do you go through in order to just separate, disconnect?
Yeah, well, that's a good question as well. As I mentioned in the lecture as well, the one day that was an eye-opening moment, because I've got a camera. I am technologically challenged, so you know, where is the record button on this was my first question, and how do I stop recording? So that's where I started from. But just one day working for 10 hours or something with different women and hearing their stories, I thought, oh, I'm good. I'm listening in, and I'm a responsible academic doing research and so on. And it hit me so bad. We were at the dinner table with mum and dad, and I had a nervous breakdown completely, because I was like a sponge soaking in all those experiences: rape, sexual abuse, virginity tests, and blood, and all those kind of keywords, which is in the teaser of the film actually. It really was disturbing, and I had to kind of learn how to undo that distance, but it's very difficult. And I think that kind of a little bit of anger, a little bit of frustration feeds into the reason why you're doing this, and that keeps me going as well. I feel for them, but I'm very angry at the feminist theoretical work that complains about how academic women are in a higher position than the people they interview. Well, in that case, no one will end up doing anything. So we need to become agents. If we have the means to tell stories, we should do that. I haven't seen any counsellors or anything like, I didn't get any counselling or anything like that at all to, you know, keep happy and healthy. I'm just proud and honoured and moved by the film every single time I hear their stories, not because the film is spectacular, but because the stories are so powerful. And I felt incredibly powerless in front of these amazingly powerful women. That's what it led me to.
The question here from Sora, who's dialed in from the States. We've got many people here dialing in from the States, which is amazing.
Hey, go TLS.
Yeah, true. Wondering whether you faced any challenges due to your sort of dual roles as filmmaker, but also as daughter of the participants' neighbours in some respects. Were the lines ever blurred? And if so, how did you address that sort of positioning?
Thanks, Sora, for that, and thanks for joining. I haven't really felt that way. I haven't even thought that. It's never been an issue as such. And if anything, I'm good friends with them, and I keep in touch with them. And they quite like hearing from me about how that screening went and what's happening and so on. And as Leila's quote suggested in the lecture as well, you know, she says, if I can change one other person's idea about child marriage or forced marriage, then my job is done. So but it never blurred, and I'm still in touch with them. She's one of my WhatsApp group people. So yeah, we were still in touch.
Yeah, that relationship, I guess, was kind of integral to the way in which you made the film anyway. So you kind of embraced it rather than tried to see it as a challenge. Yeah.
And it's a positive spin. Yeah, it's a positive spin, because had I not had those connections, they probably wouldn't talk to me. Lots of people who comment on the film, they say, oh, it feels like those women were in the room talking to me. And I said, oh, that's a great comment. That's great feedback. So it would be, and I think it was quite natural for them to talk about it. And they wouldn't necessarily talk about it to other people like that. perhaps.
There's another question in here from Thomas, who's really keen to ask this one because I can see it's come up a couple of times. He's sort of asking one about the style of the documentary. Yours is one very much about giving voice to your subjects. What do you think about more observational style documentaries that don't kind of do it the way you've done? Do you think they can be just as powerful and effective?
I'm sure they can be, but I like the idea of letting people speak. In fact, that's currently what I'm really passionate about, given the COVID environment. I'm interested in doing work as autoethnography. I think ethnographic work and autoethnographic work is quite key. I think people getting a camera, and we see this as well with NHS professionals doing selfies and talking about their experiences in the COVID environment, how it's impacted lots of different things, shops opening at different times for NHS, that kind of stuff. So I think there is incredible value of people speaking to the camera themselves rather than just another person observing them. There is a lot of value in that as well. It's just not been my style. I think it's important to follow stories. I wished I followed, and that would have been another aspect of filming it. I wish I had followed their stories, but all the filming was done in about 5-6 days, so didn't go to that route.
Yeah, absolutely. Often the filmmaking style is kind of done because of circumstance, isn't it? But you kind of followed your instinct there, which has paid off. I've got a couple of questions here. Well, I've got 2 more questions for you, but there are 2 that are kind of pretty similar. So it's about how the film, you said that the film wasn't screened in Turkey, but has there been response from people from Turkey who've seen it? And has it been positive, negative, a mixture? Can you kind of tell us a bit about that?
Absolutely. The film was screened in Turkey. It's not like not a public release or anything like that, but I've screened it at quite a few universities and to students. And the good thing about it is at least 2-3 people have emailed me from the last one I've done with a university in Istanbul, Aydın University's Global Connection Seminar. I think I've done that. And 3 people there emailed me to say they're going to do their dissertation on this topic. So whether they would be able to have access to the film again so that they could analyze it and do work. And to me, that's quite an impact, because getting people to act on something after watching what you acted on is the way to do it. No bad reviews from people in Turkey. There was one person on Twitter who clearly hadn't watched the film, but who said, "Are you trying to put a positive, show Turkey as a backward country? Are you one of those filmmakers?" And I absolutely am not. In fact, take the Turkish outside of it. I can go and film people in Norfolk in the UK and come up with a very similar narrative. Not because I can do it, because there are people who go through it. So yeah,
absolutely. That connection actually between the local and the international is so resonant, isn't it, to your work? And I think that came through very well in your lecture. So one final question for you, and it's a request. It's a request for some advice from several of our participants here, who are saying how inspiring and kind of overwhelming it was to hear you with your and your film. Some people are asking for advice on how they can act. We heard about activism being really important to you, to your work, and what inspires you. What can people do to act and do something about this important issue and the voices of women? Big or small ideas are very welcome.
Yeah, oh, that's a very good question to end with. One of them is, if you're an international educator, I would encourage, particularly given the current context, to get your students and colleagues to grab a camera or any other means of creative artifacts to make something rather than just critique things, and see if they can be part of that. And that's what inspires action, I think. But on a larger global responsibility level, I would say, I think contacting a domestic abuse charity would be absolutely amazing. And I know at the moment I'm very excited and passionate about doing this new new project on interviewing and getting videos of experiences of frontline key workers of the domestic abuse services. So I've been in touch with some of them, and they are very interested in volunteer work. So if you wanted to get in touch with any of the domestic abuse charities or any other women's rights charities, that would be welcome. Do support some of the campaigns, please. I would say Safeguard Futures Ban Child Marriage campaign, for example, and it would be a good way to act on it. And also using social media to talk about these issues, it creates a buzz. And I really, really hope that people can talk about this more often and make it more visible and audible.
Yeah, absolutely. I know when I've been advertising this talk, all sorts of people I wouldn't have expected to sort of be so impassioned about the issue have been surprised that it is an issue, but very kind of angry that it still is one that we need to be concerned about right here on all of our doorsteps, wherever we are in the world. You've kind of answered the question that several people are now asking, which is kind of what's next for you? Have you got more film projects on the horizon? I think I can say she definitely has, always new projects on the horizon. Filming, teaching, being an activist, so on and so forth. You alluded there to your project with looking at frontline workers. Is there anything finally you'd like to sort of tell us, some final sort of teaser trailer on your next project?
Absolutely. So what I really wanted to do, working with colleagues like colleagues in Norfolk Constabulary and domestic abuse champions and county council and so on, I really wanted to do a film around forced marriage and child marriage in Norfolk. Norfolk is where University of East Anglia is based, where our university is based, and I really wanted to challenge people's ideas about how, oh, these things don't happen here, they happen in the Middle East and other places. And actually to be able to show people that they do happen everywhere around the world. Norfolk couldn't have been a better place. So white, middle class, and the first county to charge offences on forced marriage. And that project is very close to my heart, and I've been building a lot of links with lots of people and the Parliament in the UK as well to do that. But with COVID coming in, I thought it would be a good idea to change the position. And given that domestic abuse, domestic violence rate have doubled up, in fact, it's 200, according to Carmen Nirvana's report, it's 200% more cases of domestic abuse since the lockdown in the UK. I'm really, there are lots of people who are talking about domestic abuse, their experiences, or charities are doing lots of online, accessible work projects to help with that. But what I'm really interested in seeing, and this is quite invisible and not audible in the media at the moment, and I hope it stays that way until we do this project, is the voice of the frontline key workers of domestic abuse charities. So that's the current project, where I'm putting a bid together with a couple of amazing colleagues together to get some funding, hopefully, and even if not, we will still carry on and do it, because it's valuable, and there is no better time than now to take action as academics.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for highlighting the relevance of arts and humanities. It's so important. Our subjects can help with that deeper understanding of these times that we now live in. They can give us hope, and they can help us act, and they can inspire us to make a difference. So thank you very much. I can hear the claps around the world, which is lovely. It's great to have shared this technological platform with you. I've seen that Rachel has loaded a few links up there, some interviews with Eylem and some links to how you can act. I've also noticed that a few people would like to be in touch with you, Eylem. I would encourage you to do so via Rachel. We've got a couple more online London lectures programmed, so please do look out for those. But I think it just remains for me to say thank you very much indeed, Eylem, and thank you very much indeed for our participants. Thank you very much indeed to Rachel and all the team for helping us put this event on this evening. Thank you, and good evening, everybody.